بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم الحمد لله رب العالمين وصلى الله وسلم وبارك على سيدنا ونبينا وحبيبنا وقرة أعيننا محمد حبيب رب العالمين وعلى آله وأصحابه وأتباعه إلى يوم الدين. اللهم فقهنا في الدين وعلمنا التأويل وألهمنا رشدنا وهدينا يا أكرم الأكرمين. Alhamdulillah, in our lessons on Mukhtasar Imam al-Quduri, in the section on Mu'amalat, we have reached Babul Bay' al-Fasid, the chapter on the corrupt transaction. Right? And these are sometimes, so this Babul Bay' al-Fasid, he refers to three types of transaction here. So fasad has a general meaning and a specific meaning. Al-fasad, one meaning here is makana mamnu'an, is that which is interdicted. It has a specific meaning, which is a particular type of interdicted transaction, which we will see. Because broadly, the types of interdicted transactions are three. Bay'ul batil, wal bay'ul fasid, wal bay'ul makruh. Al-bay', now, conceptually, a transaction has an asl, and it has awsaf, and it has ma'ani muta'alliqa biha. So a sale has an essence, and it has qualities, it has attributes, and it has meanings that relate to it. Right? So the essence of the sale is mubadalat. The essence of the sale is the item of sale. The item of sale itself. That's the essence of the sale. You would think that the essence of the sale would be the item of the sale and the price. But it's not. The price is an attribute in the sale. So bay'u ma laysa bimal batil, selling something that's not an item of value is invalid. Because the المقصود الأصلي من البيع هو المبيع وإنما الثمن وسيلة إليه. The price is a means to it. It's a necessary means, because without price, without mentioning the price, the sale is invalid, or is corrupt, right? It's fasid. Right? So an invalid sale is one that is mamnu' fi asli, is the essence of it is not permissible, which is the item of sale itself, or the two transacting parties are not fit to transact minimally. Right? So a sale did not happen. And he'll give examples of that. So that's al-bay' al-batil. Right? Al-bay' al-batil, the invalid transaction, is where what you transacted over does not count. Or you sell yourself something. because you can't sell yourself something. Because there's no, the meaning of the sale did not take place. Why would you sell yourself something? For example, anyone who has bought a fountain pen in the last 30 days is eligible to get free ink from Rabbani ink. Right? So you haven't bought ink for the last 30 days. So, but what do you decide to do? You decide to sell yourself some ink because you sell yourself a pen because you have a pen, you don't want to buy a new one. That would be batil because you can't sell yourself a pen. So that's an invalid sale. Let me look at some of the qualities of an invalid sale. The third, so that's al-bay' al-batil. Right? Al-bay' al-batil ما كان ممنوعا في أصله, which in its asl, it is the item of sale, primarily the item of sale itself, it's interdicted. And the invalid sale, the bay' al-batil, كأنه لم يحصل. It's as if it did not take place. The invalid sale, it's البيع الباطل لا يفيد نقل الملك. Right? The invalid sale does not entail an exchange having taken place. كأنه لم يكن. It's as if it did not happen. It's as if it did not happen. Okay. Right, so the ownership does not transfer. And we will see examples of that when we come to the text, right? The invalid sale, the bay' al-batil, كأنه لم يكن. It's as if it did not take place. Then you have al-bay' al-fasid, and most transactions fall under this category, right? The corrupt transaction, or you can call it the corrupt transaction, or the technical usage for it is the voidable transaction, right? The voidable transaction, al-bay' al-fasid. And the bay' al-fasid is a transaction in which some of the key characteristics of the transaction were not sound, right? Were not sound. What would these include? For example, one of the most important is the price wasn't specified. The price wasn't specified. And this happens frequently, unfortunately. Why? Because sometimes we think about, a bad, this applies in sales, but also in rent. That, people get into an agreement, that someone goes and, someone's selling a whole bunch of trousers, for example. They got baggy Ottoman pants. Or someone's got, summertime, someone brought a whole bunch of clothes from back home, whatever. So you liked 3 of them. So you say, I want this one, and this one. How much is the price? Oh, I haven't calculated the price yet. Okay, so I'm taking them. We'll agree later. What's the ruling of the sale? The bay' is fasid. Because we agreed on the items of sale, but we haven't agreed on a price at the time of sale. This is fasid. This is corrupt. Similarly, if there is insufficient description of the item of sale, so we specified what it is, but we haven't described it sufficiently. So, for example, if we say, I'll buy something from you for $10, this is invalid because we haven't specified the item of sale. But if we say, I'll buy a pen from you for $10, have we described it sufficiently to remove gross non-description? No. Has to be described a little more so it doesn't lead to dispute. Right? Because there's gross non-definition. But if you say, I'll sell you a Pilot Metropolitan fountain pen, it's sufficiently described. Now, if you don't know what that pen is, that's your fault as the buyer. Right? So by defining its make or describing it sufficiently so that there would be no reasonable dispute. Right? Or if there are impermissible conditions in a sale. That's also one of the causes of a sale being fasid. Now, a sale being fasid, a sale being batil is a big deal because it is prohibited. It is prohibited. And no transaction took place. So then, if there is an exchange of item, an exchange of money, neither does the buyer own the money, neither does the buyer own the item, nor does the seller own the money that he received. So this is a big problem, because now you have haram in your wealth. And there's categories of things, and we'll look, he gives examples, so we'll look at what those are. That's a problem. Right? The al-bay' al-fasid is one where a transaction took place. Right? So let's say Sister Zubaydah went to auntie who came back with wedding gear. But she met her at the airport because everybody ends up getting the good clothes. So she went and met her at the airport. Said, Auntie, I brought my mom's minivan. I'll drive you home. But here at the airport, I want to see the goods. So she sees the goods. So I want to buy these three. So I haven't calculated the price. So I want to buy them. The right thing to do would be to reserve them. Even to take them, but just that I've reserved these, but then to have the sale take place later when the price is set. And until that's done, not to use it like you own it. And that's the cautious thing to do. But let's say she doesn't do that. She bought those three items and we'll agree on the price later. Now when Zubaydah sits in the car and is driving away, she realizes, after dropping auntie home, of course she did that. So, oh my God, this was a corrupt transaction because we didn't agree on the price. And what's the problem in the bay' al-fasid? It leads to dispute. Number one, it can lead to dispute, which is against the divine command with respect to transactions, that إِلَّا أَن تَكُونَ تِجَارَةً عَن تَرَاضٍ مِنْكُمْ, either not setting the price, or there being jahala fahisha, or there being major non-definition. So for example, Zubayr is getting married, so he says, I'll buy a shirwani from you for $250. Now, a shirwani is not sufficient definition. Right? Actually, Shirwani may be a bad example because they typically are worn just black and so on. But they say, I'll get a wedding, I'll get a suit from you. Now you define what it is, but what color, size, material, there's some things that are relevant there. Otherwise it'll lead to dispute because not all suits are created equal. Right? So this would also lead to dispute, which goes against the divine command, إِلَّا أَن تَكُونَ تِجَارَةً عَنْ تَرَاضٍ مِنْكُمْ, unless it be through trade on the basis of mutual agreement. So that's a major problem. Or there's conditions that are not permissible, such as the stipulation of riba, for example, right, in financial or other transactions, and we'll see that comes right after al-bay' al-fasid. Or if there's gharar, there's deceptive uncertainty. So there's a number of conditions that affect a sale. Now, if such a sale takes place, this too was sinful. It's not just it wasn't a nice thing to do. It is sinful. هو معصية يجب رفعها. Right? So when this happens, so Zubaydah purchased the 3 items of clothing. Is the sale valid? Yes, insofar as the sale counts. So let's say, so does she own it? Does Zubaydah own the item of clothing? Yes. But this is a tricky part, right? What is due in the bay' al-fasid is not the agreed upon price, if there was an agreed upon price, but rather what is due is the market price. Right? If there was a price, like for example, if they hadn't agreed, like there was 3 dresses in a black bag, so Zubaydah hadn't seen what's in the bag, so I'll give, Beti, these are 3 dresses, you like them. So I agree. And they're in black sealed bags. Has she seen inside? No. So she bought them then, and they're not even described. Are all dresses the same? No. So this would be a corrupt sale. So say, I'll sell you these 3 for $450. What would be due is not the agreed upon price, it's the market price. Number 1. But number 2, so what's due in the bay' al-fasid is the qima, is the market price, not the mentioned price. Number 1. Number 2, however, both parties have the obligation of either annulling the transaction because it was sinful, or correcting it on the basis of mutual agreement.
Would they both have to agree to annul it, or could one just...
No. So the annulling is unilateral. So Zubaydah bought those 3 dresses and she says, that's so weird. I attended that class. I know this is not allowed. So she calls Auntie Zubaydah. Zubaydah calls Auntie and says, Auntie, I need to drop them off. I cannot buy this. It's a corrupt transaction. Says, Beti, I sold it to you. No. Religiously, both parties have the right and the responsibility to annul it or to correct it if they both agree. Right? Because you can't demand that well, I bought those, these 3, the 3 dresses, we didn't agree on the price, so here's the market price, you have to accept it. Auntie Zubaydah said, no, Beti, I get a bad feeling from it. I didn't want to do something haram. Right? So correcting it, rectifying the corrupt transaction would be on the basis of mutual agreement. Because maybe Auntie doesn't want to sell according to the market price. She just sells to gullible, westernized desis who don't know what the market price is. Okay? She doesn't just sell to anybody. Okay? That's her call. So that's the bay' al-fasid. We'll look at examples, right? So bay' al-fasid broadly, because there's a lot of detail, but the bay' al-fasid, it's the problem would be either in the price or in sufficiently describing the item of sale. So there is an item of sale, but it's not defined sufficiently to lift gross non-definition. Such as by telling somebody, I'm selling you a suit. So it's in a black bag. There's a suit in there. That's your size. Right? There's gross. Because, not defining material, color, this, that, the other, a whole number of things that lift gross non-definition. So that would be fasid. In the details of the item of sale, not mentioning price or the details of the item of sale or the conditions mentioned, right? We'll see examples of that. The third is al-bay'u al-makruh, the disliked sale, which the sale itself is correct, but it is related to a meaning outside the transaction that is not permissible. For example, selling inside the masjid. Right? The Prophet ﷺ forbade buying and selling inside the masjid. So the sale is valid, the item is owned, but the person incurred sin by engaging in it. So these are the three types of sales. And within the Majallat al-Ahkam al-Adliya, there are any items that relate to this that explain the essence of the principles related to what can be sold or not, right? And this starts right from the beginning of Babul Buyur, right? Item 200 onwards, from item 197 actually, right? So if you look items 197 to items 200 in the Majallah, it defines the 4 conditions for the item of sale. Right? 197 to 200. Right? Right? So it has to be, the item of sale has to exist, number 1. Right? Right? That's number 2, it has to be deliverable. Number 3, it has to be an item of recognized value. And number 4, it has to be known to the buyer. These are the 4 key conditions related to the item of sale. So it has to exist. So you can't say that I'm going hunting, the first thing I catch, it belongs to you. The second catch is yours, the third is yours. Why? Because we don't know if it exists, right? So it has to exist. Secondly, it has to be maqduru taslim. It has to be deliverable. So let's say Zubaydah left Zubair, so he got broken-hearted, so he decided to move to a rural part of Mauritania to study. But you need to own a donkey there to get around, because the shuyukh live far apart. So Sidi Hamza is moving out from Mauritania at that time, but he lost his donkey. So does his donkey exist? Yes, but the donkey ran away. So can you sell your runaway donkey to Zubair? No, because it has to be deliverable. Okay, that's the second. And yakuna maqdura taslim. This item, so 197, 198 has to exist. Number two, it has to be deliverable. Number three, it has to be malun mutaqawwim. It has to be an item of value, and the value is recognized. It's an item of recognized value. Because if it's not an item of value is anything people consider valuable. So a pig is an item of value. It's mal, but it's غير متقوم because the believer is not allowed to use it. Right? So an item of recognized value is that an item value is something that anyone gives value to. But recognized value is something ما أبيح الانتفاع به شرعا. It's something that the Sharia has permitted to use. The fourth characteristic is أن يكون المبيع معلوم عند المشتري. The item has to be known to the buyer. I'm selling you this, but I haven't shown it to you or described it to you sufficiently. Right? So item 201 of the Majalla describes how an item is known. Right? يصير المبيع معلوما ببيان أحواله وصفاته التي تميزه عن غيره. An item of sale becomes known by describing its characteristics in a manner that makes it distinct from other than it. Right? Such that it would not lead to dispute. Right? What do people reasonably consider sufficient? Right? And that depends on what the item of sale is. And of course, if the item is present, seeing it is sufficient. Right? Seeing it is sufficient. So those items in the Majalla, 197 onwards, are quite useful. I'd encourage you to gather them, even to write them out. So what are the implications of this? And this gives a framework to understand this chapter. So that's why we're taking some time on it. Item 205 of the Majalla, he tells us, بيع المعدوم باطل. Selling something that does not exist is invalid. So for example, you have a beautiful apple tree. And someone says, that's a beautiful tree, must give good apples. So you have one apple in your fridge from that. So you make them taste the apples. Oh, that's amazing. So I'd like to buy some of the apples from that tree. So say next year's harvest, I'll sell you 10 kilos of it for $50. I said, okay. Do the apples exist? No. this would be invalid. And these are called future sales. People do them all the time in the market, and there's many harms to it, and it's not permitted in the Sharia. Even if people engage in it, because there's clear hadiths prohibiting it. Rather, if you want to do that, you could reserve the item, and that's considered like a promise. Is that okay? And then there's a moral duty to fulfill the promise. But the sale would happen at that later time. Similarly, something undeliverable is invalid. Item 209 of the Majalla. So for example, Zubayr, things didn't work out in Mauritania, so he decided to go to a series of islands off the coast of India to study with some ulama. Only problem is that those ulama died out 150 years ago. He read it in a book of history. There used to be ulama at such and such place. Anyways, he went there and he bought a boat. But the boat sank. So Sidi Hamza decides to go vacationing in that island. So Zubayr says, I sell you this boat of mine. The only thing is it sank. Here are the GPS coordinates for where it is. Can you sell a boat that sunk? No. You could again do why? Because there's gharar. We don't know if you'll be able to get it or not. And then it'll lead to dispute. So rather you could do a forward sale. If it's deliverable, like it's got stuck in the shore, so it's there, but it just stuck. You have to free it. We have to see, is it freeable or not? But even that, it gets problematic. That's item 209, right? Something that anything that is not considered an item of value, this is item 210, is not valid, which is that there will be no market price for it. So for example, a grain of sand. Can you sell 1 grain of sand? No. Okay. And that goes back to the market. Would there be a market value for it, even if small? That's item 210, right? But item 211 is more substantial for us, which is بيع غير المتقوم باطل. Selling an item not of recognized value is invalid. So المتقوم ما أبيح الانتفاع منه شرعا, right? An item not permitted in the Sharia, selling it is not permitted. And this is even if it's allowed in some ways and not in others. So can you sell mini skirts? Why? Yeah, because someone could wear them in their home, although it's kind of problematic because even at home, there's at least karaha in it, but in the Hanafi school, covering the minimum awrah, unless there's an excuse, but someone could use it in an intimate context or this or that, or even it's makruh. Okay? In the other madahib, covering your minimum awrah, navel to knee for both men and women, even when alone, is sunnah. In the Hanafi school, covering your minimum awrah, unless there's a need, even when alone, is makruh tahriman. It's sinful. Uncovering your minimum awrah without need or benefit, such as so for example, buying and selling pork, buying and selling unslaughtered meat, buying and selling other haram items, buying and selling, now it gets tricky with matters of entertainment, for example, right? And we'll see rental, because rental is distinct from sales. And a lot of digital consumption is rentals and it's not sales. But buying and selling something that is primarily haram would be invalid as well. So like something like pornography, for example. It's straight up, someone who buys it, it's haram. It'd be haram sale if they're purchasing it. If they're renting it, like they get a subscription or whatever, that subscription is batil for them. Now, is it due? Is the payment due? That's a separate issue. We'll touch upon that when we get to, especially with respect to non-Muslims. Yeah, that gets tricky, right? So, selling an item that is not a recognized value is invalid. So that's item 211. Go ahead.
How about like any of the games, amusement games, ball that goes down? Is that a way to have to go to the Steam? We don't know if you're going to get it or not.
That's a type of gambling.
There's a lot of games like
Like
that.
at amusement parks, for example.
Or like the bubble gum thing. Which one you're going to get?
Yeah, so those games of chance are they're games of chance, right? They're not permissible. If it's a skill game, like if you're paying to play a game, and there may be a prize at the end, you're paying for playing of the game. If there's a prize at the end, then that's permissible. So there's an element of skill in it, right? Then it's fine, right? So yeah, that is a matter of how that does not relate to the bay'ah, because it's not a bay'ah to begin with. And then item 212, he says, الشراء بغير المتقوم فاسد. Buying using an item that is not of recognized value is corrupt. Right? So if someone says, I'll buy this microphone for 500 milliliters of wine. Right? So here, what is the price? It's the 500 milliliters of wine. If it was the item, if the impermissible item was the item of sale, the transaction is invalid. If it's the price, then it's as if you didn't mention the price. So a sale in which the price wasn't mentioned is fasid, it's voidable. Selling something undefined is corrupt. Item 213. Right? Which is an item in which there is insufficient definition. So you say, I'll sell you one of the sheep from this flock, but they're different. So there'll be dispute because the seller will want to sell the smallest, weakest, feeblest, and the buyer will want a nice, big, fat, or healthy, or whatever kind of sheep they're looking for. So it would lead to dispute. Right? So that's item 213. And so those are some of the main principles related, some of the main guiding rulings. So let's see, right, what Imam al-Quduri says. We don't want to go into too many of the rulings related to the fiqh al-buyu', to the bay' al-fasid and the batil, because there are quite a lot of details, but this gives one some guiding principles. Those items from the Majalla, we could, you can actually find the Majalla online in English. The whole thing's online. So let's say Ottoman Commercial Law Code. It's online, and there's several websites where it's actually there was like hyperlinked, so you can look quite. It's actually a useful document in English, and actually it's a good legal translation. It's actually quite useful. Majalla, I think they may spell it in a funny way, but if you add Majalla Ottoman Hanafi Ottoman Law Code, it should pop up. But the Arabic's available online as well. But the items that we've mentioned, inshallah, if someone could put them together from the Arabic into a Google Doc, would be a useful thing. Okay, so Imam Quduri says, rahimahullah, Babul Bay' al-Fasid, the corrupt transaction. In the commentator says what's meant by the fasid here is the mamnu', right? Is the interdicted sale, because so it encompasses the invalid sale and the makruh sale. And he explains that the invalid sale is that which is interdicted ما لا يكون مشروعا بأصله, in its essence. Right? وَوَصْفِهِ. Now he doesn't explain fully what al-asl and the wasf, but the asl is, so the aslul bay' is its rukn. Right? Which is aslul bay' is there being primarily is the mabir, right? It has to do with the mabir or the two transacting parties, right? So if a child came up to you, age 2 years old, and said, Khala, apple, and give you $5, can you sell an apple to a 2-year-old kid? No, because they have to be a discerning. So the transacting parties have to be, they don't have to be adult, but they have to be of the age of discernment. There needs to be two transacting parties. There needs to be an offer and acceptance. Because let's say I'm sitting here in class and, unbeknownst to me, so I'm looking this way, the sister comes and she puts $20 on the table and says, well, there's two transacting parties, you and me. There's an item of sale, so you take my pointer for $20. Was there an item of sale? Yes. Was there a price? $20. Were there two transacting parties? Yes. But there's no offer and acceptance. Right? So that's why they define that suduru ruknihi min ahlihi ala mahallihi. That's how that the basis of a transaction is suduru ruknihi wa huwa al-ijab wal-qabul. There being an offer and acceptance. Min ahlihi, from two parties fit to transact, which is al-aqil al-mumayyiz. There's someone who is sane and of the age of discernment. And the age of discernment varies between, a small item. So you have a grocery store, if a 5-year-old kid comes with a toonie and wants to buy a bunch of candy, organic, sugar-free, whatever, right? Can you sell it to them? And it's Auntie Zubaida's daughter. Sure, you sell that to them, right? Because normally the parents would be fine with the kid buying those kinds of things. They came to buy, 6-year-old came to buy some milk. Sure. But you own so there's now, you see the Hamza's on the side, besides becoming a scholar, launched an electric powered car called the Hamzatron. Right? So he hired Sister Selma to work at the showroom. So a 6-year-old comes with $125,000. Said, Auntie, I'd like to buy this car. 6-year-old. Would they be considered to be at an age where they can buy a car? No. Right? So there would be a moral obligation not to sell it to them. Right? Because the age of discernment depends on the item being sold. But actually even if they're an adult child, below a certain age, the sale would be valid, but morally the seller could be culpable. And there's laws against that even, in any jurisdiction. So that's a separate matter. So, صدور ركنه من أهله على محله, that there be a valid offer and acceptance from two transacting parties على محله ومحل البيع هو المبيع, right? On the subject of the transaction, which is the item of sale. So those are here. That there be an offer and acceptance. Because just someone put some money on the table and I didn't acquiesce. And the offer acceptance can be spoken, it can be in writing, or it can be non-verbal, but it's clearly understood. Like I was complaining, I really need to sell. I don't. Please don't get ideas. Right? Like I have, whenever I break one of these pointers, which I do regularly because of things like this, I buy exactly the same one. I actually looked for, there's newer models, but this is superior for multiple reasons, even though it has design flaws. Beginning to make sounds too. So I was complaining about it, but there's a difference between, and that's called the non-verbal sale, right? Whereas let's say I'm on the phone, so you've been trying to get, so you put $20, but I catch your attention, and I either give it to you or you take it and I approve. That's a non-verbal offer and acceptance. That's called ta'ati. So if any one of these elements is not fulfilled, a sale did not take place. It's a bay' batil. Suduru ruknihi min ahlihi ala mahallihi. Those are 3 elements. That there be an offer and acceptance, spoken, written, or non-verbal, from 2 transacting parties. You can't sell something to yourself unless you are the seller from one side and an agent from another. But that's very dangerous. Yeah. Selling something to yourself, because when you're acting on behalf of another, the assumption is, actually the responsibility is, you need to take care of it's an amana, it's a trust. You have to take care of the interest of that party. So the safe thing is to get permission either beforehand or before the transaction. So let's say, Auntie came back from India. She bought all these fancy saris, but then from all the hassle, she got a stroke. So you decide to sell the saris on her behalf. So figure in the summer you'll make some money. But you got all these saris. You're like, whoa, I could buy some of them myself and start my own business. Sell decorated hijabs, cut them from this, whatever, you got some fancy ideas. But when you're selling on behalf of someone, you are their agent. Right? So if you sell to yourself, you either sell for an agreed upon price, then there's no conflict of interest. Your auntie gives you a price list. So you don't give yourself any discount. There's a price list, there's qa'imat as'ar, then you sold it for that price. So you're not vitiating auntie's interests. But if there isn't set prices, then to sell to yourself, you would either need permission beforehand, that what if I bought some? They said, I trust you. And best to get these things in writing. Or before you put a few aside, these I really like for myself, but you should get permission. And people make mistakes in this all the time. And we're mentioning some of these things because these are practical rulings related to transactions that make transaction. These fall under al-bay' al-makruh. Because you're not necessarily, you can't say, well, no, but it was a decent price. How do you know? Because you have a conflict of interest there. And in Canadian law, too, this idea of the amana, and we'll look at it when we come to al-wakala, it's a very serious matter. It also applies to people, even if they work in a non-profit, for example, if you're selling something to yourself, to be very, very clear, and there should ideally be an approval process. There should properly be an approval process for that. So that, because otherwise there's an inherent conflict of interest. Allahumma salli ala sayyidina Muhammad. Okay, so that's, I think, enough background. Right? Sudur ruknihi min ahlihi ala mahalli, which is the item of sale. And we described the characteristics of the valid item of sale.
Is the thaman also mahalli?
No. Because what if you don't mention the price? Oh, we just discussed it. Selling something without mentioning the price is a valid sale. It's a bay', it's al-bay'u mun'aqidun meaning fasidan. It's selling something without mentioning the price. The sale is legally valid but unsound. It's fasid. So what happens there? So I was talking about how wonderful this sibha is and all the fada'il of the sibha. So Brother Kamal says, I'll buy it from you. He takes it, he says, okay, sure. And he goes. The bay' is fasid. And we would be morally sinful there. We didn't set a price. The sale is valid. But it's corrupt. So we'll agree on it later. So you should not make a sale then. And using the item during that period is very problematic because it leads to dispute. Right? So let's say you really like this table. So I'll buy it. Okay, I'm in a rush. We'll set the price later. The right thing to do is to say, okay, you can hold on to it, but we'll make the sale tomorrow. But in this period, religiously, the person should not be using it. Because your hand upon it right now is unclear. So it's contrary to basic scrupulousness or basic caution to use it. But if we didn't set the price and the sale, we made an actual sale, then we are both morally obligated to cancel the sale, and we both have the right to cancel the sale, or to come to mutual agreement on lifting the corrupting element, whether it be the price or the non-definition, or to agree to drop the impermissible clauses.
When the child.
Wait, let's forget the child. وإذا كان أحد العوضين أو كلاهما محرما فالبيع فاسد. Okay, now this is one of the tricky things about Quduri, because it's an early text. He sometimes is not very specific in his use of terminology. He'll use broader terms sometimes. So he says, if either part of the transaction, meaning the item of sale or the price, or both of them is prohibited, right? That it's غير متقوم فالبيع فاسد. The sale is corrupt. But here, what's meant by corrupt is باطل, right? It's invalid. So this is, and what يعني كالبيع بالميتة, such as selling so let's just read the expression, then I'll unpack it a little bit. كالبيع بالميتة, such as selling with unslaughtered meat. أو بالدم, or selling with blood. أو بالخمر, or selling with wine. أو بالخنزير, or selling with pork. So now, if the item of sale is any of the above, then the transaction is invalid. Because if the item of sale, the mabi', is غير متقوم, is not of recognized value in the Sharia, then for a Muslim the sale is invalid. Right? So for the item of sale, for the mabi' to be mal, not to be mal mutaqawwim, the sale is invalid, batil. But to make something that is not of recognized value, the price, it makes the bay' fasid, makes the sale fasid, voidable. So it's a sinful transaction. But what is due then is not the price, but rather the qima. So let's say, of course we can't mention any of you guys because we can't mention sin, but let's say Zubayr and Zubaydah have a fight, because turns out that Zubayr drinks. Scandal. And they're having a rough time. They fought so much, they both kind of drifted from religious practice. But they both studied a little bit. So Zubayr, so they're dividing up their wealth. All Zubayr has left is a barrel of wine. He really wants Zubaydah's calligraphy, but he has nothing to sell. He says, Zubaydah, listen, let me buy that calligraphy for this keg of wine. What's the item of sale? The calligraphy. I want to buy that. That's the item of sale. That's the price. That's why they say al-mabi' ma dakhalat alayhi al-ba' عادة. That a sign of what's the item of sale, of what is the price. عفوا الثمن ما دخلت عليه الباء. The thaman, the sign that something is the price, is the ba enters in for such and such. Okay, so the price is just the means for the sale to take place. So what's the ruling on that sale? I sell you this calligraphy. I buy this calligraphy for a barrel of wine. It would be, what would it be? It would be valid but corrupt. Because you cannot, if the barrel of wine was the item of sale, for a Muslim, that the transaction would be invalid. But making something that is not of recognized value, غير المتقوم, the price is fasid, is corrupt. What is due in the corrupt sale, in the bay' al-fasid? The qima, the market price, not the agreed upon price. So then, of course, let's say they agreed to that. Then Maulana Hamza walks by. Assalamu alaikum, how are you guys doing? And he says, oh my goodness, they're not doing too well. Because their front porch has all these things divided up, and there's all kinds of signs of marital war having just taken place. See, Hamza strokes his beard. Can I help? Said yes. And they both screamed yes. Okay. One issue at a time, please. So he'll become a wise Shaykh sit down, and he carries his own water, so he gives a cup of water to Zubaydah and Zubair to calm down. Okay? So if that transaction took place, calligraphy for a barrel of wine, what's the ruling of the transaction? It's fasid. What is due? The qimah. But both have the right to annul the transaction, or if they mutually agree to correct it. Can Zubaydah demand that he pay the qimah? The qimah being the market price for the calligraphy? No. Can he demand? Zubayr said, no, I insist. The market price on eBay is 200 or wherever is $250 for that calligraphy. Here it is. You have to give it to me. No. In the corrupt transaction, they both have the right and responsibility to cancel, and they have or they can mutually agree to remove the corrupting element. So they could agree, okay, let's agree on $165. They agreed on something, even though the market price was more. So why is the market price of consideration? What if Zubayr took the calligraphy and on the way he drove his car into Sidi Hamza's truck and the calligraphy ripped? So what's due now? Can you refund? Can you cancel the transaction after ripping it? No. Does he have to? Can he make the payment using the wine? No. So there the market price would be due. Okay, Bismillah. So this here, overall, what's mentioned here in the Lubab is not entirely satisfactory, right? 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 So basically, if these prohibited matters are the item of sale, it's batil. If they are the price, it is fasid. Okay. وكذلك إذا كان غير مملوك. If either item of sale, and it would have been easier to just stick to one of the two items, because the price in general, if the price is not mentioned, it's fasid. There's nothing you could mention that's worse than not mentioning a price. So if you mention a price that is absurd, it will be fasid. You say, I sell you this mic for 3 punches. What's due is, it's a bay' fasid. What's due is the market price of the mic. But we both have the right of cancellation. So وَكَذَلِكَ إِذَا كَانَ غَيْرَ مَمْلُوكٍ. So if we stick to the item of sale, because if the price is unsoundly specified, the bay' is fasid in all cases. If the item of sale is not owned, غَيْرَ مَمْلُوكٍ, it's not owned by anybody, the sale is invalid. Such as selling a free person. Right? So they go to some part of rural Mauritania where they still have slaves. And they tie up Zubayr and say, here is an Indian slave for you. And the guy bought him. So never owned an Indian slave before. But then Zubayr shows his passport, I'm a free man, and this and that. What's the ruling of the sale? It was invalid to begin with. وَبَيْعِ أُمِّ الْوَلَدِ وَالْمُدَبَّرِ. Or selling the mother of the child of her owner, or the slave who's mudabbar, who there's a conditional right of being freed. وَالْمُكَاتَبْ, right? And likewise, if they've agreed that if you pay me this much, you'll be free. Selling these types of slaves is not allowed, because the woman who bears child to her master's, the slave woman who gave birth to a child from her master, she would become free afterwards. It's called the Walad. So she can't be sold to anyone after that. And this is actually one of the ways whereby there would be integration of the prisoners of war into society, right? So, because the default before was that if someone took over, they would just kill the males or just enslave them, and they would rape and plunder the womenfolk, and neither would have any rights. But this was an integrative process, and there's some good. Dr. Jonathan Brown has a good book recently that has many points of benefit on slavery in Islam. Thank God the institution is over. Can't kid ourselves. There's all kinds of economic and social and political enslavement that still exists. They may not be legal slavery, but slavery, millions are enslaved in our times. Right? But at the same time, it is not an evil institution. It's an undesirable. There are institutions in any society that are undesirable. No one says that prisons are great. Heck, let's go on vacation to prison. It's not a desirable institution. There's some institutions that are there either to prevent harm or to diminish harm. And that's the role of slavery. Anyways, because if it were an evil institution, then this is an institution that the Prophet ﷺ did not explicitly prohibit. It was, limits were placed on it, on how someone is enslaved, who can be enslaved, and how can they be enslaved. Right? There's all basically, someone can only become a slave through war. Right? And there are conditions even to that. And there are conditions with respect to the rights of the slave and how they are to be integrated as part of the family, that they're supposed to be fed as your children are fed, and clothed as your children are clothed, and educated as your children are educated. Which is why throughout in many in Africa, in Egypt, the Mamluks, we have several dynasties of rulers in multiple parts of India, where there is African slaves who became rulers, and so there's a context that we should be aware of, and of course there are abuses there of that institution, like humans are given, kind of zaluman jahula. The human being was created, given to great wrongdoing and great acts of ignorance. That's just the nature of the human being. So humans commit injustice or foolish things. That's just a human being being merely human, and it's wrong. Okay. So selling something that does not exist is invalid. That's prohibited is invalid. Selling something that is not owned is invalid. وَلَا يَجُوزُ بَيْعُ السَّمَكِ فِي الْمَاءِ. It is not permitted to sell a fish in the water. This is a fish that is not, this is in an uncontained amount of water. Right? So in a fish tank, like some places, you can go and choose which fish you'll eat from a small tank, and they'll cook it for you right there. Right? But here is something that has not yet been caught. Right? Because it's غير مقدور التسليم. It's undeliverable without وَلَا بَيْعُ طَيْرٍ فِي الْهَوَاءِ, nor selling a bird in the sky. Unless it comes back to you, unless it's a trained bird. But it would have been better to say, I will sell you that falcon, and when it comes back, say, here it is. Okay, let's make the sale. Okay? ولا يجوز بيع الحمل ولا النتاج. It is not permitted to sell the fetus, right? Or the fetus of the fetus, the nitaj, right? So you cannot. So let's say, and people do this. For example, there's a prize racehorse, or for the Arabs, a prized camel. The camel gets pregnant. Everybody wants the child of that prized horse from that great pedigree. You know, in Central Asia, like the Kazakhs and others, the Tatars, they keep lineages of their horses. I'm sure some of the Arab tribes did too. Like people can cite the lineage. They say in some of these tribes, they can cite the lineage of the horse to more generations. They can cite their own lineage. They mentioned this man who says, I know the name of my father and my grandfather, but I know the lineage of my horse to 11 generations. And they, because they prize their horses. They don't care about their own lineage so much. So you cannot sell the al-haml, which is the fetus, the fetus that an animal is pregnant with, or the fetus of the fetus, which is even further down, because the Prophet, for two reasons: one, the Prophet forbade this kind of sale, and number two, it's al-ma'dum. It does not yet exist, right? It only materially exists once it's born. ولا اللبن في الضرع or في الضرع. Right? It's not permitted to sell milk when it's still in the udder, because there may be no milk. So that cow's amazing. I want 2 liters of its milk. It has no milk today. So it'll lead to a fight. Rather, you do a pre-sale. I would like 2 liters of that cow's milk. So sure, this is a pre-sale. And if there's no milk, the pre-sale is void. And then once the milk comes out, then you effect the sale itself. وَالصُّوفِ عَلَى ظَهْرِ الْغَنَمِ. And you cannot sell the wool that's still on a sheep. Because a person may change their mind, right? It's winter and you didn't want to cut the wool off your sheep. The sheep runs away, right? But also, if you specify, I want the wool on that sheep, then we may also differ on how deeply to cut. So there's a bunch of problems, right? So it's also غير مقدور التسليم and يؤدي إلى النزاع. It will also lead to dispute. ولا ذراع من ثوب. Nor can you sell 1 arm's length of a garment. And this is of a garment that is harmed by cutting it. So for example, I bought a shirwani. I said, I'd like 40 centimeters of that shirwani. After I say, once it'll be cut, I'll look ridiculous. So it'll lead to dispute. Right? This is cloth. This is a garment that يضره التبعيض, that would be harmed if cut. But if there's a roll of cloth, then that's how it's sold. It wouldn't lead to dispute. وجذع من سقف. Right? يعني ما في تسليمه ضرر. Right? So, or to sell a beam from the roof. Because let's say someone convinced me, why don't we sell that pillar? Let's say I own this place. Let's sell that pillar over there. Okay, but now if I'm going to remove that pillar, I'll realize that it'll cause harm. To sell a pillar of a building or one beam from the roof. So it will lead to dispute, because after you think about it more fully, you won't want to do it and lead to dispute. Right? So كل ما في تسليمه ضرر. Because sometimes a person may begin something, then afterwards, when they're going to actually have to give it, realize that it'll cause harm. But so the transaction there would be fasid, right? If you removed the beam, then made the transaction, then you need a new offer and acceptance for it to be valid. So they differed about this. Is it fasid or batil? And it would appear that it is actually batil. It's mentioned in the Dur, volume 4, 108 from the Hashia. Okay. وَلَا ضَرْبَةِ الْقَانِصِ. Right? Nor the, and in some books it mentions وَلَا ضَرْبَةُ الْغَائِصِ, and they're both similar. Right? So, nor what is caught by the casting of a net, either in hunting, right? So whatever I catch today with my net, either whether the hunter or the fisher, that you're on a boat, so okay, we'll cast the net, whatever fish comes is yours for $50. Because it's unknown. It doesn't yet exist, it's unknown. It lead to gross dispute, and there might not be even anything. There's gharar, so there's all kinds of problems there. Right? So this is batil, because it is effectively non-existent. There's no specification of what it could be. Right? So there's that darbatul qanis, which is by casting a net, and whatever animals you catch, for example, or al-gha'is, of the diver. Right, and they dove in different ways. One is the gha'is, the one who dive and cast a net and catch some fish, and the other would be like pearl divers, for example. If I dive, whatever pearls I catch are yours. None of those are permissible. It leads to dispute, and the item is completely non-defined. Non-defined, even if it's essence. What are you going to catch? You don't know. So it's ma'dumun hukman. Right? And then he says, وَلَا بَيْعُ الْمُزَابَنَةِ وَهُوَ بَيْعُ الثَّمَرِ عَلَى النَّخْلِ بِخُرْصِهِ تَمْرًا. Right? And بَيْعُ الْمُزَابَنَةِ, which is selling dates that are on the tree with a non-defined amount of dates that have been plucked. And this is because of riba. This is because, and we'll be coming to the rulings of riba, because dates on the tree, even though the dates on the tree are fresh, they could be raw, fresh, ripe, etc. And the dates that you've plucked, even though it may be a different type, they're dried and older dates, but any selling dates on the tree for a pile of dates is not permitted, because إِذَا اتَّحَدَ الْجِنْسِ لَابُدَّ مِنْ التَّسَاوِي. If you're selling items of the same category, then وَبَطَلَ اِعْتِبَارُ الْوَصْفِ. You must sell at par. So if you're selling dates for dates, then it has to be, let's say you're selling them by weight, has to be 2 kilos for 2 kilos. You can't say, well, these are premium majdul dates and these are old stale dates. And we'll see that in the chapter on riba. The safe things with monetary exchanges like that, and this happens a lot, especially with wholesalers, because very often they'll exchange. Someone says, we got a big order of, we got some Vietnamese customers, we need their kind of rice. Say, okay, so give me 500 kilos of basmati, I'll give you 650 kilos of whatever kind of rice. Don't do that. Set a price. So, okay, I'll sell you 500 kilos of basmati for $500, and here's 650 kilos of whatever for $500. Set a price, and you don't have to pay each price. One debt will cancel out the other. And that's al-makhraj, and one should, sometimes, Shaykh Muhammad Juma mentioned that sometimes you can't just tell people this is haram, just show them how to rectify things. And sometimes the way of rectification is very simple. So in exchanges of items where there's riba, dates on the tree for fresh dates, because dry dates, someone has had these dates, I love fresh dates, but I don't have any money. So okay, I'll sell you, give me 5 kilos of this, I'll give you 2.5 kilos of fresh dates, riba. Because the Prophet forbade it. Simple thing is set a price. It's okay, I'll get those dates for $20, I'll sell you those dates for $20. Now, you broke it into 2 transactions, there's no riba. And no exchange of money is required. One debt will cancel another. Okay. ولا يجوز بيع البيع بإلقاء الحجر والملامسة. And these were from the بيوع الجاهلية. That it's not permitted to make a sale by throwing a stone. Right? That you throw a stone and whatever it falls upon, that's what you have to buy, even if the prices were set. Because it leads to dispute. Right? And there's jahala of the mabiya. And the idea of taradi, of there being established mutual agreement. And the ulama say that the taradi, the mutual agreement at the time of transaction, it has an impact not only at the time of transaction, but also a societal impact. Because once you have transactions that have all this uncertainty, then people will hold back from it. And it has economic harms. وَالْمُلَامَسَةِ. Right? Which copy of the Lubab do you have? Every day you have a different one. Okay. ولا يجوز البيع بإلقاء الحجر من المشتري على السلعة. And what does it say after? المسامة, right? Yeah. Yeah. Yeah, that doesn't answer the question. So it's al-musama. Okay. Just look that up later. Okay. Wal-mulamasa. That whatever you touch, you have to buy. And they do this in some markets. That's batil. You touched it doesn't mean it's not an offer and it's not an acceptance. And these were sales from the Jahili time. There has to be mutual agreement. If you touch it, anything you touch, you have to buy. No. Right? And the Prophet forbade these transactions. Right? And of course, in the Tanwir, he adds the masala, he says, وَفَسَدَ مَا سُكِتَ فِيهِ عَنِ الثَّمَنِ. A transaction in which the price is not mentioned is fasid. Volume 4, page 106 of the Hashiyah. Ibn Abdin explains, لأن مطلق البيع يقتضي المعاوضة. Because any sale necessarily entails an exchange. So you bought something, it's understood that a sales transaction, you're going to give something in exchange, and there is a market standard, which is the price. But we may not agree with the price, so it could lead to dispute, which is why it's fasid, it's corrupt, but it's not invalid. Okay. وَلَا يَجُوز بَيْعُ ثَوْبٍ مِّن ثَوْبَيْنِ. You cannot buy one of two garments. I'll buy this or this. Unless you define the unless so this is if, for example, the seller says, I'll sell you either this one or this one for $50. Because you don't know what you're buying. But the buyer has the right of, there's a type of option called khiyaru ta'yin, the option of specification. Because let's say you liked, Zubayda's getting married. And her whole family is fed up. Nobody wants to go with her to shop for her wedding dress. Because they gave up. They've been shopping with her for 4 months, so she goes on her own. She finds the auntie. You showed her where auntie was. So she can't decide, should I buy this one or this one? You say, look, I've heard about your indecisive, I'm not going to say anything. So Beda tells auntie, okay, auntie, I'm going to buy one of these two. That's the option of specification. So the sale is binding on one of them. That's called khiyaru ta'yin. It's valid for if one of two, one of three. That's what's mentioned in the text. Shaykh Mustafa Zarqa in Aqdul Bay'a says, even more than that if it's a specified number. Because maybe you want to consult. You read, there's a place that's selling these beautiful tables. You want to buy one dining table, but you don't know which one. So you say, I'll buy one of these two. So you take both of them, I'll give the other one back tomorrow. And you go consult your family members. Which one should we keep, guys? So okay, so we keep one. This is called khiyaru ta'yin. But saying, I'll buy one of these two, and the price is not set, or I'll sell you one of these two, because the buyer needs to know which one they're getting. Then the item of sale is unknown, and that would be corrupting. And then he says, وَمَنْ بَاعَ عَبْدًا. Okay, so now we go into the issue of conditions in sales. Okay, conditions in sales. And the underlying principle in the Sharia is that there be clarity in transactions. So, putting too many conditions on a sale can lead to complicating a transaction, and it can lead to dispute. Or it can lead to other problems. Right? Amongst them is limiting a person's rights of ownership. Right? So for example, if I sell you a pen and say, I'm selling this pen on condition that you never sell it to anybody. If you buy the pen, you own it. Do I have a right to limit your ownership of something? No. Right? So these kinds of conditions are problematic. Or worse than that, I say, okay, I'll sell you this pen on condition that whenever I want to use it, I can use it. This could lead to dispute. Because after a while, you're like, with all due respect, excuse me, but the pen's mine, leave me alone. I said, no, but we agreed to this. Right? So, that's a problem. So, in general, there are 3 types of conditions One type of condition is شرط يقتضيه العقد. It is a condition that's entailed by the contract itself. And this condition serves to clarify and confirm the transaction. Right? So I'm buying this mic. It's a used mic. So I'm buying this mic on the understanding that I will be getting the cable and this and that it's working. And you specify the things that are entailed by the contract. And it's good to be detailed with the relevant details in a contract. Especially if an item's used, for example, because you bought some old item. I've dealt with these kinds of situations. Someone bought an old item, they bought it, I don't know where the cable is, and they don't make that cable anymore. The power supply is not there. The sale is valid because you just agreed to buy the thing. But you can't charge it anymore. Right? So the conditions that are entailed by the contract itself that complete that, those are valid. Then there's conditions that are not entailed by the contract itself, but there's no benefit in it for either party. Right? No recognized benefit in it for either party. Those are just ignored. Like, I'm selling you this cat on condition that you be nice to her. Does that relate to the item of sale, which is the cat? No. Like, is there a material right or responsibility from that? No. So that can, right? But it's best to keep those kinds of things outside the contract itself, right? Because later, like, what can you do with be nice to my cat? Now, if you say, on condition that you only feed it organic milk, whatever, these kinds of conditions are considered from unenforceable conditions. Because once someone owns it, you can't enforce it later, right? Because you have to be clear, when a sale happens, the item of sale goes to the other party, it's not yours anymore. You have no rights over that thing. In the contract, that does not enter in the contract. So a lot of conditions they're considered lahu. You have no interest in it anymore. Why? Because it's not yours anymore. Ownership is a very clear matter in Islam. One person owns something, unless it's shared ownership. And some of the ulama actually mentioned that if one cares about an animal, you could still maintain a percentage ownership in the animal. Because you could sell someone 90% of the cat, for example. You retain 10% ownership. So then you have a right on what happens to the cat, for example. Anyways, so the other type of condition is a condition that's not entailed by the contract itself, in which there is a recognized benefit for either party. So there is a recognized benefit for either party. So the condition that's not entailed by the contract, or it's not from the completion of the contract, in which there's a clear benefit for either transacting parties. This kind of condition is not permitted. Unless why is it not permitted? The default, why is it not permitted? And the default is it would corrupt the contract. Because as if you put two contracts in one. So, for example, you buy the cat, so I'll sell you this cat. You buy the cat, so I'll sell you this cat on condition that you will sell it to my cousin in 6 months. Or you'll sell it back to me in 6 months. Right? that's a problem, right? Or I'll sell you this house on condition that you rent it back to me for 3 months. It's a problem. The better thing to do is to separate the two agreements, because you put two contracts in one, you have created this conflicting rights and responsibilities arising, because you're a seller but you're also a renter within one agreement. That's why the best thing to do there is what they call sequential contracts. Contract A is a contract of sale, contract B is a contract of rent. And that's what, and many complicated transactions, there are there's multiple contracts taking place at the same time. So sometimes you see these fancy things where people are signing. Sometimes they're signing multiple different versions of the agreement, but sometimes in business transactions they're signing multiple contracts. First we have a sale, then we have a rental agreement. But putting them together could be corrupting. We saw an example of that with the buying fruits from a tree and then putting a condition that they remain on the tree. Right? Masala should be very evident in our heads. So the fear there is that this could lead to dispute between the two parties by having two different contracts being in one, or limiting someone's right of ownership in a way that they may, after the fact, not agree to, and it would lead to dispute. So this third type of condition, which is a condition not entailed by the contract and not confirming the contract, there's a bunch of types of things that can include a guarantee, collateral, etc. That is confirming the contract, right? It's not entailed by the contract, and there is a recognized benefit for either party. Such a condition corrupts the contract, is mufsid, إلا أن يكون شرطا متعارفا, unless that type of condition is customarily made. In a manner that does not lead to dispute. So it's a sound custom. And there is no specific Shari'i prohibition to it. وليس فيه منع شرعي خاص. Right? There's no specific prohibition of that kind of condition in the Sharia. So, and this became a problem because the Shari'i ideal is simplicity of transaction. But with erosion of trust between people, and with the larger scale of transactions taking place, particularly post Industrial Revolution, the transactions just became much more complicated. So this became one of the challenging issues for the Majalla to deal with. And there's a lot of back and forth that they had, and it was summarized in item 188 of the Majalla, which you can see. He says, البيع بشرط متعارف صحيح والشرط معتبر. And he gives the definition of what the shart al-muta'arif is. Item 188 of the Majalla. A sale with a condition that is customarily made, either in that industry or in that land or across the world. Such a condition is valid and the condition is recognized. And there's a good discussion on this in Shaykh Ali Haydar's commentary on the Majalla, volume 1, page 137 to 138. No, it's the condition in a البيع بشرط متعارف, the condition صحيح, the شرط is صحيح ومعتبر, it's recognized, meaning that it has to be fulfilled. Right? So the fuqaha, post Majalla, some of the fuqaha said that, and of course some of the commentators of the Majalla weren't exactly happy with this, and you see glimpses of that in Atasi and others. They try to sort of interpret it in the light of previous texts to it, but they took this step. Shaykh Mustafa Zarqa in Aqdul Bay'a, basically it is تعرف الناس على التعامل بالشروط. That now it's become the custom people that they put conditions. But this gets tricky because not all custom is necessarily accepted. Right? Not all custom is necessarily accepted. So for example, a very common thing is non-compete clauses. Right? In the tech industry, for a while, they're putting crazy non-compete clauses. You can't work 10 years in the same industry. 10 years, like someone quit a firm at 29 till they're 39, they can't work in that same industry. What are they going to do? And they have one specialization. So those require checking, right? Because some conditions are unreasonable, right? So that's why they put the condition وَلَيْسَ فِيهِ مَنْعٌ شَرْعِيٌّ خاص. There isn't a specific shari'i prohibition, because there are some things that are clearly problematic, right? So for example, auntie sold, auntie quit buying wedding clothes for women. Now she's buying wedding clothing for men from Turkey. So she went to Turkey, bought a whole bunch of wedding clothing, and Sidi Hamza becomes auntie's agent. Because auntie decided in Turkey that she's not going to talk to men anymore. It's a bit of a problem because she bought all this merchandise. So, but once you said, I don't want to be your agent, let me just buy it from you. So you bought all auntie supplies of Turkish wedding dress, but auntie put a condition. I'll sell this clothing to you on condition that you can no longer, that you can't buy from anyone but me. Right? So some conditions there, if a condition is not clearly a normal condition, one should check. One should check that is this a condition that can be made or not. Because a lot of times people try to limit, because basically people have monopolistic tendencies. Right? Trying to put conditions so that they maintain exclusivity, this and that. And some conditions count and some don't. Right? These are tricky areas. Can you be an exclusive distributor for somebody? And the fuqaha said yes, because there's an interest in that. Right? Someone may not want too many different people selling their products, whatever. That's their right. But some non-compete clauses are considered because there's a material interest. Someone's invested a lot of money in a particular thing. They've trained the person. The person now has skills and intellectual property but sometimes people, now it's of course against the law in most countries because this has been dealt with like many years ago. But let's say, there's a halal beach resort. So Sidi Hamza gets hired that if you work at our shawarma joint, you can no longer work at any other shawarma joint within 50 kilometers for the next 5 years. Is there any exclusive knowledge to the shawarma joint? No. So that would be non-binding. So the conditions get tricky, and the way of caution with respect to these kinds of things is one has to check beforehand, right? Because it's hard to put them all under one encompassing definition. So we'll continue from here. ومن باع عبدا على أن يعتقه البائع المشتري أو يدبره أو يكاتبه etc. If you sell a slave on condition that the buyer sell it or grant it the means of being freed, or that he not sell it to anyone else. أو باع أمة على أن يستولدها, or you sell a slave girl on condition that you have children with her. فالبيع فاسد. The sale is corrupt, and we'll see the principles related to this next week, بإذن الله تعالى, and we'll complete in the next class, and we'll complete the section on البيع الفاسد, and then we'll come to the إقالة, the cancellation of sales. Any questions before we close? Go ahead.
Last issue, ولا يجوز البيع بالثمن. Is this فاسد or not?
فاسد.
Even though the isn't, no, oh, because it's not enough.
Yeah, it's no. There's enough definition that it's existent because one of two. But it's fasid. But if it's specified that okay, the buyer has the right of choice between one or the other, this khiyaru ta'yin, this option of specification.
So we mentioned the three types of shield. If we're talking about number two, not entailed by the contract completely, it doesn't carry benefit, could one agree to a contract like this and ignore the uses for it?
It's better not to. It's better to get it out from the contract. So look, let's just agree. I'm buying the cat. Okay, that's the sale. That don't bring it into the sale itself. Let's say I'll agree to be nice to your cat, etc. But let's keep the two things separate, right? Some people get prickly like that. I'll sell you the house on condition that if someone kept their garden in a particular way, whatever. And those things lead to dispute because afterwards the person wants to come and see the garden and say no. And the basis is you shouldn't do that. But now if you agree to it and then you choose to ignore it, then it leads to dispute anyways. Right? So you bought the house and you agreed that okay, I'm gonna take care of your garden just as you did. So the person wants to come and see their garden, etc. And lead to dispute. Say, look, sorry, we have a family gathering. I don't want you to come and poke around in the garden. So it would lead to not a legal dispute, but a human dispute. So it's better to negotiate those things out of a contract.
What if a company, like for example, let's say a sports company, and they have a sports drink, and they hire an athlete, and they make them do, let's say, 2 ads in like 5 years, and they're not allowed to do ads for anyone else, but they'll pay them like for those 5 years. Would that be?
That's not a sale. That's a hire, technically. Yeah, so those are exclusive contracts. Again, is it a condition that's reasonably entailed or not? Right? So exclusivity contracts, it depends. And it goes back to market practice. Where it's reasonable market practice, then it's binding. Because there's a principle, and we're going to take the principle from Ibn Abdin wrote a treatise on نشر العرف في بناء بعض الأحكام على العرف. Right? He wrote an entire treatise on how some rulings of the Sharia may be based on custom. And then he summarized the discussion in one line of poetry that's found in his عقود رسم المفتي. للعرف وللعرف في الشرع اعتبار لذا عليه الحكم قد يدار. Custom has consideration in sacred law, which is why rulings may revolve around custom. And that's why in the Majalla, it's from the Qawa'id al-Majalla, the first 99 points of the Majalla. There are 99 Qawa'id fiqhiyya, legal maxims. One of them is Al-'adatu muhakkamatun. Custom has, has legal consideration. But there are principles like related to that. We'll touch upon that next class. There's of course a translation of